The Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions will please come to order. As we start, I was amazed that C-SPAN's not here. I thought, could there be a better committee hearing than this one today? We're here. And I say that because maybe it's only I as a physician, but I understand the importance of this hearing. In my career, I graduated from medical school in 1983. And there are diseases at the time that were common and debilitating and or fatal that now, because of American innovation, are like, nobody ever sees it anymore. And I could even go further back, because the pediatricians, when I was in med school, would speak about hospital wards being filled with children with measles and the complications thereof. And as soon as the vaccine came out, within 6 months, whole wards were closed down. That is the power of innovation. Another example I always give, when I was in med school, cutting out a portion of someone's stomach to treat peptic ulcer disease was common. And now Tagamet came out, a drug now sold over the counter, and within 6 months, it was like never done before. My wife is a general surgery resident. She was pretty bitter about that. But anyway, despite that, and we can go on. There's now treatments for obesity, Alzheimer's, malignant melanoma, other conditions before untreatable, cures for hepatitis C, spinal implants made with 3D printing, tests to detect diseases faster, other interventions to improve patients' outcomes. Now, our country has led the world in these discoveries, accounting for 40% of world biotech-related patents for drugs. And backed by the FDA's gold standard review, we produce twice as many novel chemical or biological products as European countries. FDA has also approved over 30 cell and gene therapies, including the first gene therapy for sickle cell disease. In the hospital in which I taught and managed patients, sickle cell disease was so awful, with repeated hospitalizations for patients who just were in pain crisis after pain crisis until they became addicted to drugs, and then their whole life spiraled down. Now there is a therapy for it. It is incredible. But we can't rest on our laurels. If we're going to maintain that edge, there's things we must do. Regulatory uncertainty and outdated frameworks stifle progress and push developers overseas to Europe, Australia, and most recently to communist China. I recently spoke to a group of biotech leaders. It was interesting. In varying degrees, they view China as a collaborator, as a competitor, and as a threat. When the developers are looking outside our country for early-stage clinical work, we need to pick up our game. It's important for the American biomedical industry. It's important for patients. We need structural reform to give innovators stability and confidence that they can create in the United States without hardship. This includes eliminating unnecessary barriers in the FDA drug approval process while ensuring the gold standard of review is maintained. It means leveraging AI, machine learning, and new technology platforms such as mRNA to accelerate drug discovery and clinical development. We also have to recognize, although outside the scope of this committee, that post-FDA, coming to market depends upon CMS streamlining the coding, coverage, and reimbursement process so that new technologies don't die a slow regulatory death post-FDA approval. That is not of this committee's jurisdiction, but it's critical and must be considered. Finally, we must ensure fair competition for American biomedical companies with nations that do not share our values and engage in anti-competitive practices like forced technology transfer and IP theft. These reforms will advance President Trump's goal of making America healthy again while strengthening our dominance in the 21st century global economy. It's pro-patient, pro-family, pro-America. I look forward to discussing these ideas more at today's hearing. With that, I recognize Senator Sanders.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I agree with some of what you said. Certainly don't agree that President Trump is trying to make us healthy again by throwing 15 million people off the health care they have and doubling premiums for 20 million more. That's not making America healthy. But you are quite right that over the last number of years, there have been a number of innovations that have saved lives, eased pain, and we thank all of the scientists and the companies that are responsible for that. Scientists who work at our nation's universities, the NIH, and pharmaceutical companies deserve our gratitude and respect for the incredible work they have done to discover, as the chairman mentioned, new treatments and cures. And we must continue to support those efforts. There is enormous opportunity out there to save lives, extend our life expectancy, and ease pain. But let us be very clear. A life-saving drug, no matter how wonderful it may be, does no good for people who cannot afford it. That's just the simple reality. Yet, Mr. Chairman, here is the reality. 1 out of 4 Americans today cannot afford to purchase the medicine prescribed by their doctors because they cannot afford them. Just think about how crazy that is. People who walk into a doctor's office, they're sick, they get diagnosed, doctor writes out a prescription, they cannot afford to fill it. So what happens? They suffer. Maybe they end up in the emergency room. Maybe they end up in the hospital at great expense to the healthcare system. That is pretty crazy. So in my view, one of the issues that must be looked at today is not only innovation, it is the cost of medicine here in the United States. And in my view, we can no longer tolerate the American people paying, by far, not even close, the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. Why does Merck charge Americans? Simple question, and maybe some of our panelists will help us answer it. Why does Merck charge Americans with cancer $206,000 a year for Keytruda when the same exact drug can be purchased for $80,000 in Germany and $42,000 in Japan? Pretty simple question. I think the American people would love to know the answer to that. Why does Johnson & Johnson charge Americans with blood cancer $188,000 for Darzalex when that same exact drug can be purchased for just $82,000, less than half, in Canada and $79,000 in Japan? Why does Bristol-Myers Squibb charge Americans with advanced melanoma $204,000 for Opdivo when that same drug can be purchased for $73,000 in Germany and $48,000 in Japan? Pretty simple question. Maybe our panelists will be kind enough to give us the answer to that. How does it happen that, according to Reuters, the median price of new drugs has more than doubled over the past 4 years, going from $180,000 in 2021 to more than $370,000 today? And the answer, in my view, can be summed up by that famous American expression, follow the money. Follow the money. Since 1998, pharmaceutical companies have spent more than $6.3 billion on lobbying, and we welcome all the lobbyists who are here with us today, to ensure that their profits come before the health of the American people. Today, this is really quite unbelievable. Today, we have over 1,800, I do wish C-SPAN were here, over 1,800 well-paid lobbyists in Washington, D.C., including former leaders of the Republican and Democratic parties. That is 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress. Wow, 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress. Maybe that explains why we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. During that same period, pharmaceutical industry has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in campaign contributions to both political parties. Meanwhile, millions of Americans suffer and others die because they can't afford the prescription drugs they need. 10 top pharmaceutical companies made over $100 billion in profits last year, but it's not just industry profits. Take a look at what their CEOs are making, and maybe our friends here will explain that to us. For example, after charging Americans with diabetes outrageously high prices for Moderna, the CEO of Eli Lilly, Mr. Ricks, made over $113 million in total compensation last year. Americans can't afford prescription drugs. CEO of Eli Lilly made $113 million in compensation. CEO of Regeneron made $124 million in compensation. CEO of AbbVie made nearly $80 million in compensation, et cetera, et cetera. And here is another reality. Since President Trump took office in January, the price of more than 680 prescription drugs have gone up, not down, et cetera, et cetera. So, Mr. Chairman, I think we are in agreement. There is huge potential on the part of our scientists, researchers, pharmaceutical industry to come up with important drugs to deal with diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's, you name it. And that's what we want them to do. But let us also understand there is probably, maybe with the exception of Wall Street, I will give you that, maybe no industry more greedy, more selfish than the pharmaceutical industry. And they have got to stop their practices, which are forcing millions of Americans to go without the medicine they need. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. We'll join by our witnesses today. I'll introduce each of them just before their testimony. First is Mr. Lowell Schiller, non-resident senior scholar at the USC Schaeffer Center for Health Policy and Economics. He's an FDA policy expert who, prior to his post at USC, Schaeffer held senior leadership positions at the FDA from 2017 to 2020, most recently as the Principal Associate Commissioner for Policy. He's also a former HELP Committee staffer. Welcome home. Served as senior counsel for Chairman Lamar Alexander while working on legislation like the 21st Century Cures Act. He holds a law degree from Harvard and an undergraduate degree from Princeton. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Chairman Cassidy, Ranking Member Sanders, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on improving patient access to novel medical products while sustaining U.S. leadership in biomedical innovation. My name is Lowell Schiller, and I serve as a non-resident senior scholar at the USC Schaeffer Institute. From 2017 through 2020, I held senior roles at the US FDA, as the chairman noted, including as Principal Associate Commissioner for Policy and Acting Chief Counsel. We are at a pivotal moment for medical product innovation. Scientific and technological advances are accelerating development of novel products that hold remarkable promise for patients, from targeted therapies and regenerative medicines to increasingly sophisticated diagnostics. And modern development tools can help bring products to market faster and at lower cost, while meeting the same regulatory standards for safety, effectiveness, and the protection of human research participants. To fully realize these opportunities, FDA must maintain a modern regulatory ecosystem that enables innovative products to reach patients efficiently without compromising scientific rigor. As technology evolves, FDA must evolve with it. When it doesn't, we risk needless uncertainty about how products will be reviewed, which means more risk of late-stage product failures and less investment in advanced technologies. FDA has made progress over the last decade. That includes delivering on congressional mandates in the 21st Century Cures Act and other legislation. But there's still much to be done. First, FDA can facilitate more use of advanced evidence generation techniques. For example, innovative trial designs and sophisticated uses of real-world data. FDA's pilot programs and guidance documents have laid the groundwork by helping explain when and how these techniques can be used appropriately. There's no one silver bullet. These are tools in a toolkit. Each one has its own uses and, frankly, its own challenges. But deployed as appropriate and using scientific best practices, they can make our R&D infrastructure more efficient. We're still early in adoption. The next steps are for FDA to expand its programs and refine its policies to address emerging pain points, issues around data formatting, and FDA's review of patient data, or regulations that need updating to accommodate approaches like decentralized and community-based trials. Second, FDA can do more to support the development of treatments for rare diseases, where traditional trials often are not possible due to small patient populations, uncertain disease progression, and many other factors. The agency could be more systematic about innovative approaches and endpoints, and could be doing more to advance promising tools, like using historical or real-world data when it isn't feasible or ethical to randomize patients into a control group. And FDA can promote scalability by streamlining review in the drugs and biologics centers when products share a common technology, or when a product can be individualized in the course of care. Third, FDA can modernize its internal processes to facilitate more innovation. The agency is already building infrastructure to apply AI and advanced computing in product reviews. With refinement and appropriate guardrails, this offers the opportunity to make reviews more efficient, predictable, and higher quality. FDA can also update processes to improve confidence in the accelerated approval pathway, which has enabled earlier access to over 300 drugs for serious and life-threatening conditions, about half of which have gone on to be converted into traditional approvals. This includes increasing procedural transparency and leveraging more real-world data to improve follow-through on confirmatory trials, which would help address challenges like retaining study participants. Finally, FDA can update regulations to make operating in the United States more globally competitive, particularly in areas where we've seen the most offshoring, like manufacturing and early-phase clinical research. The current manufacturing regulations were written for conventional technologies and can create uncertainty that makes it harder to deploy advanced manufacturing techniques in domestic facilities. There are also opportunities to streamline requirements for early-phase research while maintaining protections for human subjects so that research in the United States can get off the ground faster. With reforms like these, we can ensure that our country's mature regulatory system continues to instill confidence in novel products and remains a competitive advantage for the United States. And we can ensure that patients are able to benefit from the remarkable innovations that our biomedical industry is advancing. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. Next is Mr. John Crowley. He's the president and CEO of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, BIO, the largest advocacy organization representing biotech companies and industry leaders in the world. Mr. Crowley has decades of experience in pharmaceutical and biotech development, beginning in the 90s when 2 of his children were diagnosed with a rare and often fatal genetic disorder. Determined to find a cure, he founded a startup that ultimately developed a life-saving treatment. He attended the U.S. Naval Academy and holds degrees from Georgetown University, the University of Notre Dame Law School, and Harvard Business School. Thank you, sir. Please proceed.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Cassidy, ranking members. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was great. Again, Chairman Cassidy, Ranking Member Sanders, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of BIO, the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. As you indicated, Senator Cassidy, we represent more than 1,000 biotech companies, academic institutions, and research centers across the United States. And as you also indicated, Senator, my experience is very personal in this world, going back to 1998, when our 2 youngest children, Megan and Patrick, were diagnosed with a fatal and rare neuromuscular disease. At that time, there was no treatment, there was no hope. 2 years later, after that diagnosis, and nearing what was supposed to be the end of our children's lives, I quit my job, took a home equity loan and cash advances on credit cards, and partnering with a brilliant scientist in Oklahoma City, we started a small biotech. Within 2 years, and then partnered with a much larger biotech company based in Boston, we successfully developed an enzyme replacement therapy that saved our children's lives, and eventually the lives of thousands of others around the world. That therapy was born of American innovation. It gave my children a chance to live their lives. My daughter Megan went on to earn a degree from the University of Notre Dame. She works today as a social worker with the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Patrick, our son, works in a flower shop staffed entirely by people living with disabilities. Today, this ecosystem that saved our children's lives is one of America's greatest strengths. Biotechnology is a uniquely American-born and American-led industry. This committee and this entire nation must care about biotechnology for 3 important reasons. First, for the public health. Second, as an engine of economic growth. And thirdly, for our national security. America's biotechnology companies today have hundreds of experimental medicines in clinical studies and thousands more in earlier stages of research, each with the promise to extend and enhance human life, to alleviate suffering, to give those with illness or disease a better quality of life, and a chance to have more time with the people they love. Biotechnology also drives more than $3 trillion in annual economic output. We employ 2.3 million Americans, and indirectly we support more than 8 million others across all 50 states. And U.S. biotechnology dominance is national security. The world, the entire world, is a better, safer, healthier, and more prosperous place when the United States, together with our allies, lead in biotechnology. But that American-led biotechnology ecosystem today is greatly challenged and increasingly uncompetitive. At the same time, China is catching up fast, now launching nearly as many clinical trials as the United States and expanding its share of the global drug pipeline 8-fold in just the past decade. China's biotech push isn't just economic, it's strategic, and based upon a belief that controlling access to the world's most advanced medicines will provide them an enormous amount of global power and influence. So how do we maintain and advance our lead in biotechnology? First, we need to strengthen the FDA and its role as the global regulatory gold standard. We should modernize clinical trial processes and make early-stage development more efficient. We should also improve review predictability, expand the use of modern clinical trial designs and biomarkers. Importantly, we need to strengthen communication with our innovators, our developers, so that innovation isn't delayed. We see today encouraging signs from the FDA, and I have great confidence in Commissioner McCary to boldly and smartly reform the FDA. Second, we must rebuild America's biotechnology manufacturing base. Small and mid-sized biotechs need help to build domestic capacity and capabilities. That means targeted incentives, tax and capital support for contract manufacturers, supply chain investment, workforce development, and streamlined infrastructure permitting. Third, we need to reauthorize the Rare Pediatric Disease Priority Review Program. This voucher program has already helped lead to therapies for 39 pediatric rare diseases and cancers. It costs taxpayers nothing, and it has proven to be one of the most effective market-based incentives for innovation. Mr. Chairman, the United States has led the world in biotechnology for decades, not by chance, but with great purpose. Strong science, smart policy, and the partnership between innovators and government has made that possible. Bio and our member companies stand ready to partner with Congress to make this happen and to continue to maintain and advance our lead as the world's global technology leader. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, we're joined by Dr. Josh Makower, a biomedical engineer, professor at the Stanford University Schools of Medicine and Bioengineering, and director of the Stanford Mussallem, did I get that right, Mussallem? Center for Biodesign. He was the chief architect of the center's biodesign process, which has trained hundreds of thousands of students and faculty in developing medical innovations. He's not only a professor, but an inventor, holding over 300 patents and creating 10 medtech companies. He holds a medical degree from NYU School of Medicine, a master's of business administration from Columbia, and a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from MIT. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Cassidy, Ranking Member Sanders, members of the committee for this opportunity to testify. My name is Josh Makower, and for over 36 years, I've dedicated my life to developing therapies and technologies. Oh, okay. Thank you. Over 36 years, I've devoted my life to developing therapies and technologies to improve patient care. The impact on patients and their loved ones drives my passion to improve our innovation ecosystem, and why I'm so honored to be here today. In addition to being a physician, inventor, and entrepreneur, at Stanford University, I'm a professor of medicine and bioengineering and co-founder of the director of the Stanford Mussallem Center for Biodesign. Throughout my career, I've had countless interactions with the FDA and its teams. The FDA, like any large organization, has had its challenges, but its willingness to adapt have contributed to the United States being the global leader in health technology innovation it is today. I know from personal experience that the people at the FDA are resolutely focused on ensuring patients gain access to safe and effective cures, therapies, and diagnostics that our ecosystem develops. For decades, the United States has dominated global healthcare innovations, resulting in cost-effective cures and treatments for diseases, improving patients' lives everywhere. However, that leadership is now under threat from nations like China. We must not be complacent, and we should pursue policies to support this fragile ecosystem. My submitted testimony details several suggestions, but I did want to highlight a few. Patients are best served when the FDA review process is transparent, reasonable, consistent, and efficient. At Stanford in 2024, our research found that a majority of biotech innovators indicated that the typical time for a new cell or gene therapy to advance through the FDA is 6 to 10 years, and that the biggest challenges were issues such as reviewer or key staff turnover and lack of transparency during the approval process. These issues must be addressed. Adequate FDA review staff is a priority. and I appreciate the efforts by many of this committee to ensure that FDA reviewers and inspectors were not impacted by RIFs. However, I am concerned that many senior review staff have retired or left the agency. Each center must maintain a stable workforce to facilitate transparent, reasonable, and timely interactions with innovators. To help these efforts, industry has paid user fees to maintain this workforce, but when these positions are vacated, they need to be backfilled one for one, and we need to exempt user fee-supported positions from any future cuts. As a physician innovator myself, I know that simply providing more staff does not result in process optimization. We're experiencing a revolution in the way that complex data sets are analyzed and decision-making is supported through the use of AI across every aspect of our lives. The same holds incredible potential for medicine and surgery. Whether it is AI-assisted EKG interpretation to detect arrhythmias, improving the detection of early-stage cancers, or powering robotic procedures, AI can also be leveraged very effectively by FDA staff to support and accelerate reviews. The issue of efficiency is essential, as small companies are the engine of innovation in this country, and their funding is often not capable of bridging over substantial process delays. Innovators and regulators should also explore ways to optimize interactions to prevent adverse impact on patient care. There are growing concerns, for example, that the pre-submission program, originally designed to enhance opportunity to engage with FDA review teams, is being overutilized for simple interactions for which it was not intended. Pre-submissions have tripled from 1,500 to over 4,000 in just a few years. This has led to instances where innovators are waiting up to 70 days to schedule a meeting to discuss minor questions historically handled over a short phone call. This is inefficient for innovators and for the FDA. Finally, true patient access for novel health technologies requires efficient and effective FDA authorizations, but also a more rapid reimbursement system by CMS and private payers. Our Stanford research found an average of 5.7 years delay after FDA market authorization before the most nominal level of reimbursement is established. This valley of death harms innovators, investors, and most importantly, Medicare beneficiaries. I strongly encourage Congress to pass the bipartisan Ensuring Patient Access to Critical Breakthrough Products Act, and I'm thankful there is broad agreement in both chambers that this legislation should move forward to narrow this gap. I and my fellow innovators remain committed to working closely with you to reach our shared goals of expediting patient access to safe and effective health technologies and ensuring that the United States remains a global leader in these important fields far into the future. Thank you very much, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, sir. I defer to Senator Sanders to introduce his witnesses.
Thanks very much. Our first witness is Dr. Aaron Kesselheim, who is a professor of medicine at Harvard School of Medicine and Brigham and Women's Hospital. Dr. Kesselheim's research focuses on drug pricing, FDA regulation, and pharmaceutical policy. Dr. Kesselheim, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you. Chairman Cassidy, Ranking Member Sanders, members of the committee, my name is Aaron Kesselheim, and I lead the program on regulation, therapeutics, and law at Harvard Medical School. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this hearing on how to promote transformative biotechnology innovation in the U.S. One of the primary ways the U.S. has assured a vibrant pipeline of essential biotechnology products is through high levels of public research funding through the NIH and other federal sources. Take CAR-T treatments for various forms of cancer like Kymriah. It arose from scientists at Penn and other places and only came to Novartis late via licensing agreements. We found that over $100 million in NIH grants contributed to development of the Yescarta CAR-T for lymphoma. All FDA-approved gene therapies to this point can be traced to academic research institutions or their spin-offs that developed key know-how in underlying biotechnologies. Luxturna for blindness was based on key work at CHOP, Penn, Cornell, and Florida. The federal government catalyzed new sickle cell disease treatments with viral vector technology from the NIH and CRISPR technology invented at academic institutions. We found that about 42% of recent new biologic drugs had late-stage reliance on public funding. Despite this track record, the current administration has severely undercut NIH funding in targeted universities where these innovations arose. Despite all these successes, the health budget for 2026 includes a 40% cut for NIH. At this level, one model found that an enormous number of drugs, 1 in 8, might not have been discovered over the last 20 years. But the final decision on these matters should be up to you. Congress must reestablish the normal flow of research funding before the U.S. scientific establishment and a new generation of innovative biotechnology treatments is irreparably damaged. Another way Congress can support transformative impact of biotechnology innovation is by making sure that innovation is available to patients who need it, which requires reasonable prices. In this context, the IRA offered important relief by allowing Medicare to directly negotiate prices of certain drugs, just as the government negotiates or sets prices for every other product it purchases. But the IRA only applied to drugs many years after they're FDA approved. Still, it has secured in its first year real, useful price reductions that will affect large numbers of people. By contrast, recent administration moves on drug pricing won't result in nearly as meaningful price reductions. For example, the administration announced secret deals with some drug companies in which they promised, without providing any details, to introduce future drugs at prices comparable to those in other countries. But those unenforceable promises only apply to Medicaid, which already gets major rebates, and there are plenty of ways for manufacturers to game the system by launching drugs at different times or at different formulations around the world, or securing undisclosed rebates in those countries. In these deals, the Trump administration also announced a website to help companies facilitate direct-to-consumer sales of brand-name drugs at reduced prices, but there's always a catch. In this case, patients have to pay for these drugs directly, outside of their insurance, and most cannot afford brand-name drugs that cost thousands of dollars, even at discounted prices offered through these websites. Manufacturers' stock prices have tended to increase when these deals are announced, showing you that investors also think they lack substance. Because such actions will mostly be useless, Congress can take its own steps to ensure that essential biotechnology innovations are accessible. First, Congress should fix what we call the biologic bonus, an extra period of 4 years of delayed negotiations that only applies to biologic drugs, beyond the standard 9-year delay that applies to other drugs. Special treatments of biologics in the U.S. over small molecule drugs is not justified by any differences in biologic development costs or risks. Indeed, biologic drugs generally make more revenue than regular drugs and progress through the FDA approval process faster. Second, Congress should revisit its move in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act to exclude rare disease drugs from negotiation. Why should we be concerned about negotiating fair prices for rare disease drugs like Darzalex and Keytruda that are already making billions of dollars a year? The CBO concluded that this change will cost us $8.8 billion. Instead, Congress should pass the No Big Blockbuster Bailouts Act, which allows negotiation for rare disease drugs making $400 million in annual Medicare sales. Third, Congress should take steps to promote timely price-lowering competition, like passing the Ethic Act to reduce large patent thickets on biologic products. In the opposite direction, this administration's patent office is making it harder to get bad patents off the books. Finally, enjoying the benefits of biotechnology innovation also requires that patients have adequate insurance coverage, but the government has moved to reduce enrollment in Medicaid and is currently poised to allow Obamacare marketplace premiums to soar to unaffordable levels, together affecting insurance coverage for over 15 million people. Congress should stop these destructive changes. Making basic health insurance reasonably available to as many people as possible can help ensure that biotechnology products reach the patients who need them. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the conversation about this.
Thank you very much. Our second witness is Dr. Reshma Ramachandran, who is a practicing primary care doctor at a community health center and an assistant professor of medicine at the Yale School of Medicine. She's an expert in ensuring patients have access to safe and effective health technologies. Doctor, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you so much. Chairman Cassidy, Ranking Member Sanders, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Reshma Ramachandran. I'm an assistant professor at Yale School of Medicine, where I co-direct an interdisciplinary research and policy program called the Yale Collaboration for Regulatory Rigor, Integrity, and Transparency, or CRIT. I'm also a primary care physician, as Senator Sanders noted, taking care of patients at a federally qualified health center in New Haven, Connecticut. My remarks reflect my own views and not that of my employers nor the organizations I work with. Based on my research examining how drugs, medical devices, and other products are regulated and covered, I have detailed specific solutions in my written testimony for Congress and federal health agencies, including the FDA, to consider that would help ensure patients receive timely access to truly effective, safe, and affordable treatments. However, this future where we can work together to deliver life-saving cures to patients is being threatened by our present reality. In the past week, several of my patients have urgently shown me notices that they've received announcing significant increases in their health insurance premiums. Too many of them, including those who have multiple chronic conditions requiring regular visits with me and their specialists, as well as multiple prescriptions, are either considering or have decided to forego health insurance due to these premium price hikes. These price shocks have not just affected my patients who receive coverage through the ACA marketplace, but also others who are employer-sponsored health plans and are seeing premium increases due to the rising cost of prescription drugs and other health services. With the continued shutdown of the federal government and expiration of critical health provisions, Medicare patients in our clinic can no longer receive covered telehealth services. I see the harmful consequences of all of this in my patients, those who are increasingly rationing their care, and conversely, those who are asking me to prescribe a bulk set of refills in anticipation of losing their healthcare coverage. My patients with chronic conditions that require frequent monitoring and adjusting of their treatments through our monthly telehealth appointments, but cannot walk or move without great difficulty, are now asking their family members if they might be able to borrow money to pay out of pocket for a telehealth visit out of desperation. In considering the future of biotech, one thing has become clear. New biotechnology discoveries will be of no use to my patients or any patients if they are unable to afford them. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, Medicare for the first time was granted the authority to negotiate lower drug prices for older and disabled adults, effectively setting a price benchmark for other health plans. Medicare can now consider therapeutic value, how meaningfully beneficial a treatment is, in negotiating a fair price for patients. As FDA increasingly leaves unanswered for patients and their doctors whether treatments work or are safe at the time of approval, Medicare's ability to negotiate could serve as an incentive for manufacturers to generate robust evidence of a drug's therapeutic value and compare its benefits and harms to other available options. This would not only help U.S. patients receive a fair price, but it would also incentivize better innovation. And when drugs are proven to be meaningfully beneficial for patients, we as doctors will prescribe them. However, now the ongoing crisis related to access and affordability has only been worsened. Rather than strengthening Medicare's negotiation authorities, Congress has passed legislation to further exempt or delay negotiation for even more drugs approved for rare diseases. For example, price negotiations for Jakafi, approved for rare bone marrow cancer and other non-rare blood conditions, are delayed until 2028. In 2023, Medicare spent over $138,000 per patient on this drug. Medicare patients will have to pay 25 to 33% of the drug's claim cost, or approximately $2,100 per prescription fill. The impacts of perpetuating high drug prices are not only on patients, but also on our healthcare system. The Congressional Budget Office predicts that these new negotiation exemptions and delays will cost Medicare and thus taxpayers up to $8.8 billion over the next decade. Proposed fixes in the form of backroom deals between the administration and brand name pharmaceutical companies will also fail to lower drug prices for the majority of patients. Platforms that directly sell select branded prescription drugs at reduced list prices will be of no use to patients with limited fixed incomes and those facing a loss of health insurance coverage. Moreover, for most of my patients who take multiple generic medications, these platforms offer no real cost savings. While policies to address ongoing supply and quality issues for generics are welcome, these solutions are predicated on having a well-resourced and well-staffed FDA who can address the backlog of manufacturing facility inspections that predate COVID-19. Onshoring of manufacturing facilities will not happen overnight and requires a robust FDA to ensure that medicines are being produced in the United States are safe and effective. However, the recent firing and attrition of more than 20% of the FDA workforce, including over 900 scientists and technical experts, as well as over 500 regulators, compliance officers, and investigators, threatens the U.S.'s ability to continue critical regulatory operations and implement solutions that deliver a sustainable supply of treatments that work and are without harm to patients. Industry reports have also noticed delays in FDA meeting regulatory deadlines and decrease in approvals. Generic approvals that enable choice, competition, and affordability are also at a new low as of this year. The future of biotech cannot be centered around technical fixes that prioritize or hasten the market entry and greater reimbursement of new health technologies and unclear benefit. Instead, I would urge Congress to center such a future around patients, where federal health agencies can ensure that incentives for innovation are aligned with what patients and their doctors care about the most, making sure that those who need it have access to cures that meaningfully work, that are safe, and that are affordable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I will defer to Senator Tuberville to begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Mr. Schiller, following President Trump's domestic manufacturing executive order, the FDA launched the PreCheck program to support U.S. drug manufacturing. The program offers more frequent communication at key development stages and simplifies some manufacturing information required in applications. How can the FDA use PreCheck to improve inspections, encourage more domestic pharmaceutical manufacturing?
Thank you for the question, Coach. The program has a lot of potential. Some of the challenges around investment in domestic manufacturing goes to a degree of uncertainty about how FDA's regulations will apply to those facilities. And so having earlier, more frequent interactions with the agency through that process can help enormously. There's other things that the agency can be doing as well, things like updating manufacturing regulations to accommodate more advanced manufacturing techniques. The regulations were written for conventional older techniques, so updating them to take into account use of AI, use of continuous manufacturing would be incredibly helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Crowley, Hudson Alpha Institute in Biotechnology in my state of Huntsville is a global leader in genomics and precision medicine. In 2008, it has generated over $3.5 billion economic impact in my state, 45 companies it supports, 2,000 high-paying jobs, has attracted more than $300 million in competitive research funding. Hudson Alpha acts as an incubator for biotechnology research and development. It helps researchers move their ideas from lab to product development. NASA has been involved in space genomics. It's helped with cancer and heart disease risks. What are the institutes like Alpha Hudson doing right, and how can we continue to encourage more similar efforts?
Senator, Coach, thank you for the question. You bring up a very important point, and this is how medicines are made. If you look last year, nearly 3/4 of all medicines approved by the FDA originated from startup biotech companies. Over time, well more than half of all medicines come from these small businesses, these incubators of research. When we look at what it takes to make newer and better medicines, it's an entire ecosystem. It's what we call this virtuous circle of innovation, grounded in our great academic universities or institutions like in Alabama, oftentimes funded and partnered with the important research that goes on at the National Institutes of Health. And that foundational research is what oftentimes spurs our startup companies. And so many times over and over again, it's a great technology, a disease where there's an unmet need. There are entrepreneurs, people giving angel money investments, startup capital. There are economic development funds in many of our states, such as in Alabama, to support these startup companies. And also, too, having these clusters in so many, and really in each of your states, where innovators, entrepreneurs can come together, where there's lab space provided, where they're in proximity to academic research. Oftentimes, our startup companies, the founders, scientific founders, have joint appointments at local universities, state universities, and our startup companies. This is what's so uniquely American. You know, biotechnology is only a 49-year-old industry. Our very first company, Genentech, was founded by a scientist at the University of California, San Francisco, and a venture capitalist as well. This happens in every state. It happens in Alabama. And as you go along that virtuous circle of innovation, it takes this community, the small companies, it takes our contract research organizations, our contract manufacturers, providers of capital, oftentimes Wall Street, ultimately driving private capital to these incredibly risky, incredibly expensive, and incredibly important ventures. So again, I commend the state of Alabama and what they're doing to promote research, science, and development. This is the heart and soul of biotechnology, and it's what we need to strengthen and continue.
Thank you. Mr. Makower, we talked a lot about the United States' history of global leader in biotechnology. We held that title for decades, and we want to keep it for generations to come. Could you explain how America built and sustained this dominance, and what targeted strategies we can pursue to maintain it?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Senator. Most importantly, we need to remove unnecessary delays. Efficiency through the process is absolutely key, as most of these innovations are coming, as John Crowley mentioned, from small companies that rely on venture capital and a very short timeline to be able to achieve their goals. So by improving the process and shortening it, allowing it still to be as rigorous, but removing inefficiencies, that's one of the primary ways we can do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sanders.
A lot of questions, limited time. So I'd appreciate brief answers, please. 1 out of 4 Americans cannot afford the prescription drugs their doctors prescribe. Do any of you have information as to how many thousands of Americans a year die because they cannot afford the outrageously high prices of American prescription drugs? Mr. Schiller, do you know how many thousands die?
I don't have that statistic.
Mr. Crowley?
I don't know, Senator.
Dr. Makower?
No, Senator.
Dr. Kesselheim? Dr. Ramachandran? Okay. Let me, the theory is, well, let me ask Mr. Crowley a question, if I might. Health and Human Services Secretary Kennedy has said that there is, quote, no vaccine that is safe and effective. He has also said that the polio vaccine, quote, killed many, 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 many more people than polio ever did, end quote. Do you agree with the Secretary?
Senator, I believe, and Bio believes, that vaccines are an incredibly important part of the public health. I have in my office a gift that was given to me many years ago. It's a picture of Dr. Jonas Salk, and I keep that in my office today. Vaccines have done as much or more to transform human health than any technology we've ever developed. They are safe and effective. They need to be rigorously studied, and they should continue to be, as we did during Operation Warp Speed for COVID. So we are perfectly aligned. Bio actually ran a campaign.
Okay, I beg you. Thank you very much for your statement.
Thank you.
Mr. Schiller, do you agree with Mr. Crowley?
I do. Vaccines are one of the great public health success stories.
Dr. Makower?
Absolutely, I agree.
Okay. Dr. Kesselheim, I find it strange that we have a situation where over a recent 10-year period, 14 major pharmaceutical companies spent $87 billion more on stock buybacks and dividends than they did on research and development. And and CEOs, as I mentioned a moment ago, of the major drug companies make over $100 million in compensation. What does that tell us a little bit about the goals of the motives of the major drug companies?
Well, as with all companies, they're responsible to their shareholders and primarily responsible to their shareholders. And so I think what it also says is that if we are trying to stimulate innovation, it makes most sense and it is most efficient to give that money to where that innovation comes from, which is at the academic institutions where it is discovered, and not to the end product to the end of the stage where the large pharmaceutical companies are spending only about 10 to 20% of their revenues on innovation. So for each dollar spent on through the NIH, you will incentivize a lot more innovation than for each dollar spent to those in.
No, what you're saying is that financing research should be the goal, not making stockholders extremely wealthy or outrageous compensation packages for the CEOs.
I mean, we need to make sure that there is a reasonable market out there for drugs, and there is, and drug companies make a lot of money from it. And as we're thinking about incentives and ways of trying to encourage innovation, I think the most important way to do that is to try to, raise the ground and to grow the amount of innovation that comes out of where it comes from, which is from publicly funded research.
Okay, Dr. Ramachandran, you are a practicing physician working with low-income and working-class people. What impact does the high cost of prescription drugs have on the quality of life of your patients?
It can be life and death, the difference between life and death for many of my patients. Because of the rising cost of prescription drugs, there are oftentimes choices that they're making at the pharmacy counter or when they come to clinic asking me if I can select which drugs among a lot of the life-saving drugs that they're taking that they could maybe skip that month or not take because of the cost. When they go to the pharmacy counter, they have to make decisions between paying for that drug or paying for their rent or other needs as a part of their life. So it has made a huge difference. And oftentimes what it's led to is people showing up to the hospital because of delayed care, because of not treating their conditions, and sometimes even death amongst my patients.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and for our witnesses for being here today. Some of you I've met with personally, so appreciate your time on such an important topic. This country has blessed the world with numerous treatments and cures for all kinds of diseases in the 50 years since biotech became a reality. American biotech is strong and growing in Florida. I am one of the newest U.S. Senator from Florida. I am told it is home now to nearly 3,000 biotech, pharmaceutical, and medical development enterprises. We are home to 27 bio members. Immune Bio, based in Boca Raton, is a new biotech focused on developing 2 new drugs, one novel therapy to treat Alzheimer's and another to treat an ultra-rare pediatric skin inflammation disease. But like so many other companies, it chose to plant roots in this country because we have free markets, deep pools of capital, and a highly talented workforce. I believe Florida is only becoming more blessed with more talent in this area. So we've seen progress from startups having multiple drugs heading into phase 3 trials, and that demonstrates how small science-driven companies can drive significant progress for patients with nothing else that can help. In September, the Miami Times reported that Florida is the first in the nation for investment in clinical trials, now ahead of California and Texas. So that to say biotech is a burgeoning sector of my state's economy, and I agree with the chairman that Congress should work to unleash the power of American life sciences. So thankfully, we're seeing this president and other initiatives that have invested over $425 billion in investments for R&D, manufacturing, and jobs. I think that is incredible, and I expect great things throughout this administration. Mr. Crowley, I'll start with you. I was touched by your story. It is truly amazing, and I think it's emblematic of what we can do when Americans have a personal cause and the resources to do something about it, and the policy that would support successful outcomes. And that's so important, and why this committee is addressing this important topic. I've heard from so many of my constituents that a faster, clearer guidance from FDA, particularly on rare neurological diseases, would be greatly beneficial. They've told me that additional support for accelerated approval pathways could contribute to huge breakthroughs for patients. Makower recently announced the FDA's intent to establish a new conditional approval pathway for drugs, which could further empower biotech to bring a greater diversity of cures to patients suffering with rare disease. How do you believe, well, what is your opinion on that announcement, and how do you believe that we as Congress can make constructive changes at FDA to empower biotech and bring more breakthrough therapies to market?
Great. Senator Moody, thank you for your question, and thank you again for everything in the state of Florida. When our children were originally diagnosed, one of the first centers we went to all the way in Florida from where we lived in New Jersey was Shands Medical Center. So you've got the right ecosystem, the right environment. Years ago,
Well, it's the University of Florida.
The University of Florida, yes.
Go Gators.
Go Gators.
My school, but I'm just saying that.
You know, for Senator, you're absolutely right. When we got into this world,
The senator is out of order.
He always does that to me.
I'll throw in a Go Irish. So, Senator, you're absolutely right. When I came into this world, all we focused on was science, medicine, technology, raising capital. Now in this world of rare diseases, we've never had more technologies, more opportunities where doctors don't have to tell families, parents, what they told us years ago, that I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. There are a range of options. Most of our challenges now are man-made, including regulatory. And we need to modernize. We need to strengthen the FDA. We don't want lower standards. We don't want them to approve everything. There are advanced regulatory tool sets, biomarkers, surrogate endpoints, adaptive clinical studies, Bayesian statistics. What we need is an FDA that's modernized, strengthened, and that uses the entire tool set and looks at every disease and every proposed molecule through a risk-benefit assessment. Nothing is without risk, but take a look at each of these diseases, particularly in the rare diseases. So we're seeing very positive moves toward that, the creation of the Rare Disease Innovation Hub, other moves that I think we'll continue to see from the commissioner. So we've provided some ideas, and we'll continue to work with the FDA on that, but it's incredibly important so that we get as many therapies to absolutely everybody in need as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we talk about this really important topic of future of biotech, I think it's important to note that since President Trump took office and Secretary Kennedy was confirmed, the Trump administration has terminated $2.3 billion in life-saving research that was funded by the NIH. They tried to cut billions more from our medical research labs in every state by illegally implementing a new indirect cost policy. They proposed gutting the NIH budget by 43%. That's about $20 billion. They've laid off thousands of scientists and grant administrators at NIH and across HHS. They have slowed the FDA's review of drugs and medical products by firing thousands of staffs at the agencies, and they have halted more than 100 clinical trials that were working on discovering promising new treatments and cures. So it seems to me that this administration has declared war on public health, and those examples are just a few of many. So Dr. Kesselheim, I wanted to ask you, does canceling more than 5,000 NIH grants on everything from cancer to Alzheimer's disease increase or decrease American competitiveness in biomedical research and innovation?
It substantially decreases it because those, we will lose the competitive battle that we have with academic institutions and research institutions in other countries if we don't continue to have that level of support and more that we need in this country. That the support for research at those centers that ultimately then lead to spin-off companies or other development. That's where we get our cures from, and we really need that in order to stay competitive with science that's going on around the world.
Yeah, and I think that we should note that more than 99% of all new drugs approved by the FDA from 2010 through 2019 were actually built on a foundation of NIH-funded research. So it's pretty clear that our country's historical success that you've all talked about relied on a really strong pipeline from basic research through pharmaceutical development and our investments that we make here. Dr. Ramachandran, what do the administration's cut at NIH and FDA mean for pharmaceutical companies' ability to bring new treatments and treatment and medicine to patients?
There's both a short-term and a long-term problem. Obviously, in the short term, you mentioned clinical trials being canceled. These are oftentimes kind of the late-stage development steps for us to be able to see, is a therapy potentially safe and effective for patients? And that is not as happening as often, and there's been delays in terms of awarding also grants as well. And then the cuts you mentioned to FDA is causing real-time effects in terms of getting new therapies reviewed in a timely manner, much less approved. So that means treatments potentially that are safe and effective that are not reaching patients. On a long-term perspective, NIH is the agency responsible for the foundational research that leads to the startup companies that Mr. Crowley was talking about, that other senators have also mentioned before, that have come across various states as well. And that is really kind of the catalyst for innovation in the first place. If we don't have that sort of investment in NIH, in 5-10 years down the line, we're not going to be seeing new treatments that are going to be transformative for our patients. And we've heard from the biotech industry, they do not have the resources to make up for any sort of shortfalls from the NIH, nor do they have the compulsion to do so because they have shareholders who want to see short-term returns, right? That it's not a 10-year pipeline for them that they're looking at. They're looking for returns in 1 to 5 years, typically. On top of that, our trainees that we're seeing in our academic institutions in particular are leaving the United States to go to other countries because they are not seeing opportunities both in the public sector and academic institutions to continue this research, much less in also the private sector. There have been huge job cuts also there as well.
Thank you. And Mr. Crowley, I wanted to ask you that first of all, thank you for sharing your family's personal experience. That was I think a story many of us need to remember, that these investments that we make pay off for individuals, and we cannot ignore that. I hope everybody recognizes that. I wanted to ask you specifically because NIH operates the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network, and their chaotic policy changes and firings of more than 1,600 scientists and grant administrators at NIH has upended many of the clinical trials. Researchers are now hearing they may not be able to reapply for some of this funding for more than 5 years from now. So talk to me about how canceling rare disease clinical trials and suspending future funding impacts rare disease patients and their families.
I think it has a direct impact, Senator. Again, in that virtuous circle of innovation, the NIH plays a very, very important role in foundational research and facilitating translational research as well. So for us, for the entire industry in biotechnology, it remains incredibly important as well, and we'd support continued funding of the NIH.
Well, thank you. I am out of time, but Mr. Chairman, I think we all need to, as members of Congress, recognize we have a responsibility here to fund those critical agencies and not decimate the future with these layoffs and mass firings and losing the funding.
I'll mention that to the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee.
Thank you, and everybody else who votes. Thank you.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Dr. Ramachandran, I'd like to start with you if I can, and I want to come back to this topic about the price of prescription drugs and the availability of prescription drugs. I note that you're both a researcher, professor, and also a clinician, a primary care physician, so you have up close and personal experience with this. Let me just throw out some statistics that caught my eye and get your reaction to them. Between 2010 and 2021, the United States lost 26,000 independent pharmacies. 45 million Americans now live in pharmacy deserts where there is no pharmacy, local pharmacy, or any pharmacy within driving distance. That includes in my home state of Missouri. You know, Missouri, we've got 2 entire counties that have 0 pharmacies of any kind. 0. 2 whole counties. CVS, I note, this year announced plans to close 271 retail stores. Walgreens says over the next 2 years it will close 1,200 stores. So we're seeing mass consolidation. 3 companies, I think, control 80% of U.S. prescription drugs. What's the effect on patients from this mass consolidation and lack of access?
It's devastating. I'll say I have personally seen this with my patients where they're having to either figure out how to drive an hour or 2 hours even farther away to be able to pick up prescription drugs, especially for things that are emergent, like an asthma inhaler in particular. And this has just caused devastating effects and sometimes have landed them in the hospital or even worse. So it's definitely a huge problem, and also, results of, as mentioned, the consolidation, the various stakeholders that are not being regulated, that there's not proper oversight over, including pharmacy benefit managers, as well as the pharmaceutical companies that enable incentives for those entities as well. We have a huge problem with our pharmaceutical supply chain in terms of who's controlling access, price, and availability of these medications.
Let me just ask you about that point because I think it's so important. Let's just stick on PBMs for a second. Is it a good idea, do you think, to allow PBMs to buy up independent pharmacies and other pieces of the medical supply chain? I mean, should PBMs be purchasing pharmacies and purchasing doctors' practices in some cases and purchasing hospitals or merging with hospitals? Is that kind of consolidation across vertical consolidation across the medical supply chain, is that a good thing for patients?
No, and we know this from various studies, including studies that we've conducted looking at patient outcomes. When that has occurred, outcomes on patients are worse. If outcomes were for patients were actually better in terms of access, quality of care, and things like that, we would be having a different conversation. But instead, we're seeing the opposite. And in particular, it's because they're prioritizing kind of bottom lines. What can they do to be able to maximize profit instead of actually thinking about patient outcomes?
Let me read to you from a recent news article about private equity and their entry into the healthcare system. Here's a quote: "When private equity enters healthcare, closures are not side effects, they're the business model. Extracting value for investors comes at the cost of extracting access from patients." It seems like to me one of the big problems we have in our health system today in the United States is we've got a lot of companies and corporations who are rapidly consolidating and they're strip mining the American health system for their profits, but not for the good of patients. So prescription drug prices keep going up, up, up. Access to those drugs continues to decline. So what are some prescriptions you would give us as policymakers to address these problems?
I know the committee, and especially you as Senator, have been talking about reforms to various parts of the supply chain, including obviously pharmaceutical companies, but also PBMs, right, to actually address this issue around consolidation. Obviously, regulation of private equity, right, because to having oversight of these deals, which has been happening in some states to some extent, but usually after there is some harm that's occurring to patients. Being able to be proactive, to be able to stop the sort of consolidation, these merger and acquisitions, and be able to understand what the impacts are on patients before they happen, I think is most important, and that's going to require regulation. And also entities like the Federal Trade Commission to step in to actually ensure that anti-competitive practices are not moving forward.
You know, I've always been a big believer in antitrust as an attorney, as a believer in a free market. I mean, a free market works best when there's competition, when there's free and open competition. That's what keeps prices down. That's what benefits consumers. And when you see the kind of consolidation we are seeing, whether it's on the pharmacy side, whether it's on the big pharma, the production of pharmaceutical side, I think it's really no surprise that we're seeing the increase in prices, but the decrease in care to consumers. And so you're right, this is why I believe one of the things we ought to do immediately is prevent PBMs from buying up every aspect of the supply chain. Why should PBMs be able to own all these pharmacies? Why should they be able to start buying doctors' practices? We don't allow that in other aspects of our economy. Why should we be allowing it in healthcare? I think it's nuts. And I think it's time we actually, in our competition policy, started putting patients first. So thank you for the work you've done on this. Thanks for the rest of the panel, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Crowley, I'd love to start with you. Just a quick question here. Would you say that the U.S. right now is the leading country in the world when it comes to biotech?
Senator, yes, we are the leading country in the world when it comes to biotechnology, but China is a rising competitive threat and a rising threat in general.
So in that case, so right now you can say definitively we are
in the lead
leading
today.
country. What about in 10 to 20 years from now? Can you make that same definitive statement?
No, not at all. In fact, it's a lot sooner than that. If you look at the National Security Commission report on emerging biotechnology, they have 49 recommendations to strengthen, maintain, and advance our lead in biotechnology. But we need to act boldly, and we need to act today. We believe within 2 to 3 years we can lose this. To give you some perspective, 10 years ago, about 2% of the innovative medicines being developed in the world came from China. A decade later now, it's about 25%.
Mr. Schiller, I mean, what we just heard from Mr. Crowley saying, even within 2 to 3 years that we could be losing our competitive edge here. I really think that the key here is not just what are the steps that are going to move us forward, but for us as a committee and as a country to embrace the urgency of this moment. I guess I want to ask you, are we operating with the level of urgency as a nation, as a government, as an industry that we should be at this point?
Senator, thank you. I don't think we are. And I think there's more we can be doing to try to ensure that the regulatory system, the ecosystem, allows for faster trials getting off the ground in the United States so that less of that research is moving out to other countries.
Mr. Makower, you talked about, Dr. Makower, you talked about this in terms of the challenges that we're facing, whether it's about reviewers and turnover on that front, or just resources writ large. I guess I want to ask you in terms of the FDA, does the FDA have the resources and the staffing needed right now to be able to meet this urgency that we've been talking about in terms of our global lead on biotech?
Thank you for the question, Senator. We could do much better. We absolutely should be refilling vacancies one-to-one. We absolutely need to deploy the latest technologies in reviews. Most importantly, to be competitive, we need to reinforce and deeply invest in our U.S. scientific and clinical infrastructure. That science has propelled innovation in this country, and it's absolutely important. We also need to support intellectual property and stand behind our U.S. innovations and fight infringing entities who are coming mostly from China that are utilizing our intellectual property to create their businesses. So these are the types of things we can do to support our competitiveness in this effort.
No, and I think we absolutely need to be taking that on. But when it comes to the FDA, I will say, when I hear what you're saying when you're saying we need to backfill one for one,
Yep.
Based off of what's happened. But I also just want to make sure, like, we're not just trying to tread water here.
Right.
You know, we're really trying to figure out how we can move forward. Like everyone here, I feel like none of you would say that we're on the trajectory that we need to be in terms and the urgency that we need to be on. So I just urge this committee to, yes, we can think of some steps and we can ask this question, are we on the right path? And backfilling one-to-one, that can be part of it. But it's not just about are we on the right path, it's are we with the right velocity? that we're trying to be moving forward on. And, Mr. Schiller, just wanted to go back to you. I mean, one thing that could really unlock some of this velocity is about AI and utilizing that to be able to supercharge our research. What regulatory or statutory changes do you think are necessary to encourage the innovative use of AI?
So the most exciting uses of AI in drug development involve reducing the time, the expense of drug discovery, and getting compounds into clinical trials. And if we can find ways to move from that process into first-in-human studies more efficiently and move from computer trials to human trials, that would help substantially. And then leveraging AI as a tool within our clinical trial infrastructure, I think there's much more that we can be doing where AI can help with decentralized and community-based trials, helping with trial recruitment. The more those tools are leveraged, the more competitive our system becomes.
Thank you. I really just want to hit home here as I conclude, that the one word here for me is about urgency. And I don't want to think about it just in terms of the urgency for economic gain or the urgency for geostrategic leadership. I thought, Mr. Crowley, your opening of your testimony, it was about the urgency of a dad, an urgency of a parent. And I hope our nation moves with that same level of urgency and speed that we would as a parent trying to save the lives of our children. And this is really, sometimes it gets lost in this talk about just industries and whatnot. But what this really should be about is about saving lives and the ability for our country to save millions of lives around our country and around the world. And with that, I'll yield back.
I defer to Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to take the thread of what Senator Kim was just saying about the urgency of a parent caring for a child, and just note the moment that we're in right now in day 29 of a shutdown. And I thought you, Dr. Ramachandran, really helped bring out that the numbers of people that we're talking about who won't be able to afford their health insurance, and when they shop on Saturday, or when the opening period of shopping for Affordable Care Act marketplace plans, they're going to have a real shock. And I worry on both sides. I so support the biotechnology innovation that's going on across the country in my state. I want to talk about that with you, Mr. Crowley, in a moment. But we have an opportunity here to act, to bring some relief so that parents can afford to get health care for themselves and their children. And I just wanted to emphasize that. Now to the topic of today's hearing. Wisconsin is a national leader in biohealth, thanks to our investment in strong research institutions, advanced manufacturing, workforce training, and industry partnerships. According to the 2024 Wisconsin Biohealth Economic Impact Report, the industry supports about 141,000 jobs and generates over $37 billion in total annual economic impact. And because of the strong foundation in my state, in 2023, a consortium led by BioForward, a member of Bio, was selected as a regional tech hub focusing on personalized medicine and advancing the adoption of the next generation of theranostics. Mr. Crowley, in your testimony, you mentioned that each part of the biotech ecosystem is integrated and complex. And so I wonder if you could speak to the importance of funding programs like Wisconsin's Biotech Hub that deals with all of the ecosystem parts.
It does. Thank you, Senator. Again, Wisconsin is one of our great states in biomedical research, as you indicated, anchored in great academic institutions and entrepreneurial mindset. So I think it's a great example for the United States and many of our other states as well. When it comes to funding, these state-funded programs that oftentimes complement private capital, also oftentimes complement federal capital, are incredibly important. When you're starting a company, it's a very risky environment, and capital markets wax and wane. So oftentimes these state funds can provide the capital where there's either failures in the capital market or the technology is simply too early. And if you look at Wisconsin, some of the therapeutic areas that you alluded to that they're developing are areas where they have expertise coming out. And that's one of the things you see with many states. Not everybody's trying to do everything. Some are experts in cell and gene therapy, again, coming from their entrepreneurial base, coming from their academic institutions. So yes, I think these are incredibly important programs and a part of the ecosystem, but important to recognize the vast majority of capital that goes into drug development is private capital.
In April of this year, and you referenced this report, Mr. Crowley, the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology released an action plan with a number of recommendations regarding the future of the field. And the report aims to ensure that the United States remains the global leader. We've seen this playbook before with China. They make a sector a strategic priority, and it can achieve global dominance in that space if left unchecked. We cannot let that happen with biotechnology, which is so critical to our public health and economic strength and national security, and for the moms and dads with children that they love so much. So can you expand upon the dangers of losing our global leadership role within biotechnology? And what would a world where China leads in biotechnology look like?
I think it would be a very different world from the one we have today for the health and safety of our entire population. We need access to our medicines, so we need to think about where are they made. At the end of the day, Senator, I don't care where my kids' or grandkids' toys are made. I really care where our medicines are made. So we need to act with great urgency, as Senator Kim said, to look at biomanufacturing. Where are we making our medicines? How are they distributed? And ultimately, where is the research and development coming from? So this is incredibly important. We must win in biotechnology. We have the lead today. If we don't continue to act, it'll be a very different world.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great witnesses, great panel. A lot of agreement around this life cycle of innovation, beginning with research through the NIH and our research institutions, on to improvements in the validation and approval process, onto strategies that can increase production, especially production here at home. So I appreciate this. I'm very proud to represent Virginia, which is a leader in biotech research and innovation. When I was a city councilman and mayor, I helped found and then grow the Virginia Biotech Research Partnership Authority, which has grown investment and interest in biotech in Virginia and the Richmond region. This continued investment has done very well for the Richmond region where I live, but across the state. The Richmond-Petersburg region received an advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing grant through the first an ETA Tech Hub designation through the CHIPS Act, but also $52 million for advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing through the American Rescue Plan. And that has really enabled the Virginia biotech industry to take off. Just in the last few months, we've been benefited by announcements for several major projects in Virginia. AstraZeneca, Eli Lilly, and Merck are making massive investments, but our ecosystem also includes small innovators that are doing great. We're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Genelia Farm campus of the Howard Hughes Medical Research Institute in Loudoun this month. So there's a lot going on in Virginia. I wanted to ask about one part of this innovation chain. So beginning with research through approvals and innovation through production. In the 1980s, there was a set of lawsuits filed against vaccine manufacturers over the DPT vaccine, diphtheria, pertussin, tetanus. And those lawsuits threatened to shut down the manufacture of those vaccines in the United States. And so Congress created the, let's see here, the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which has been a substitute for the traditional tort system and created a no-fault mechanism for those who do suffer side effects from vaccines to receive compensation. By my way of thinking, that's worked pretty well. It has not only worked well to provide prompt recompense to those who do have side effects, it's also done pretty well in enabling us to collect data. So we can see how many successful claims per million vaccines there are in DPT and in measles and in COVID. And tracking that data turns out to be really helpful to us as well. I'm very worried that Secretary Kennedy has flirted with the idea of eliminating the program and restoring us to the status quo ante from the 1980s, where it's just like a litigation free-for-all against vaccine manufacturers. And I worry if we went back to that, we would see the same that we were seeing in the 1980s, vaccine manufacturers saying it's just not worth doing it. And then we would lose the ability to actually produce these vaccines here at home. I appreciate that there's uniform acceptance and support for vaccines, safe, reliable vaccines on this panel. How damaging would it be to the production of safe, reliable vaccines here on our home shores if we were to eliminate this vaccine injury compensation program? Dr. Ramachandran, I'll start with you.
It would be disastrous. In particular, manufacturers are very sensitive to what the government is asking for, right? What the regulations are, and so the market is really dictated in many ways, as many of us have talked about, by how government sets policies. And so the vaccine injury compensation program has provided that sort of security blanket for manufacturers to be able to safely proceed. If they anticipate any sort of disruptions to the market, either because of removal of the program, changes, to recommendations, changes to coverage in particular as well, they will exit the market. And so we're seeing right now across different states some efforts from manufacturers to say, can you make sure that we can still have a place to be able to provide vaccines for your constituents? But at a federal level, that has a much more broad impact and does not provide them security. And for patients, ultimately that means they won't have access to the vaccines that they need, and we will have too few choices to offer them, and the possibility of infections that we thought were gone coming back again, potentially.
If I could ask, are there any other members of the panel who'd like to weigh in on the notion of what would happen if we eliminated the vaccine injury compensation program? Dr. Kesselheim.
Yeah, I would say it would be extremely damaging. One of the special things about vaccines is that we need confidence in vaccines so that a large number of healthy people take vaccines to prevent the diseases from spreading and from infecting people who therefore, who have problems with their immune systems and can't take vaccines that are at risk for it. And so we really need there to be confidence in vaccines so that healthy people take them, and we need there to be a vibrant manufacturing supply of them so that there can be vaccines available to people who need them, and so that we can help prevent the diseases that the vaccines have been extremely helpful in preventing.
I'm over time, but any significant disagreement among the other three panelists to what the first two witnesses have said?
No, I'm in full agreement, Senator. It would be devastating. It would harm many, many people. The system has worked well. We should strengthen and preserve it.
Great. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank all of you for not just being here, but for all the work that you've done. Mr. Makower, let me start with you. In your testimony, you identify several recommendations which you believe would help continue American leadership and dominance in biotech. Your testimony highlights the need for the FDA to fully leverage predetermined change control plan policy that was enacted by Congress in 2022. I worked with Senator Braun on that. We need to make it easier, not harder, for medical devices to grow with the changing landscape of technology. So Dr. Makower, what specifically do you think is preventing this policy from being fully leveraged within the FDA?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the question. Specifically with respect to predetermined change control, we're really talking about medical devices where they're utilizing AI and other types of machine learning, where there's potential for change for the software subsequent to the initial review, but those things can be anticipated. This is only going to increase as we utilize these technologies. And really, AI is an enabling technology to allow for better access to healthcare at lower cost for Americans. So it's very important for us to find ways of using predetermined change control and other means to allow for AI to play a bigger role in healthcare.
Great, I appreciate that. Dr. Kesselheim, in your testimony, you discussed the importance of breakthrough drugs being available to patients at fair prices. especially for those drugs which benefited from government investment in their development. The Medicare Drug Pricing Negotiation Program, which was passed in the Inflation Reduction Act, is an important part of getting, treatments to patients at a fair price. Your testimony noted the negotiations resulted in discounts of 38 to almost 80%. This is a huge drop. It's a reflection of how much we've been overpaying relative to what the rest of the world is paying. When we were trying to pass that bill, we heard horror stories from the industry about how the negotiation would kill the ability of pharmaceutical companies to develop new drugs and continue their research and find the capital for that research. Can you explain how the negotiation is working and the impact it is having or not having on the ability for pharmaceutical companies to continue their research?
Sure. I think that in the first year, the negotiation process seemed to work very well, and as you said, achieved meaningful reductions in prices that, by the way, even those reductions in prices are not as low as the prices for those brand name drugs in other countries. So
you don't get everything.
Yeah, there is still room to move in terms of the negotiation, and we'll see how the second year goes. But I would also say that none of those dire warnings have come to fruition yet. I think by virtue of any measure that you look at of innovation, number of mergers and acquisitions in the last couple of years, amount of venture capital investment, even the things that that the companies are saying to their investors at investor meetings, everybody seems to say that innovation, there have been no changes in the innovation as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act, and in fact, investments have increased in those first few years afterwards.
But I think it's becoming a bipartisan issue. I think that there's a general recognition now that it's not Biden's plan or it's not Trump's plan, it's our plan going forward. Mr. Crowley, obviously robust funding for the National Institutes of Health has helped drive innovation in terms of biomedical innovation. The first 2 shingles vaccines were developed in Colorado, which we're very proud about. Doctors studying Parkinson's at CU Anschutz were the first to use neuropixels, these special implants in the brain, to obtain data on how brain functions. The president's budget requests, the budget's request puts all that future at risk. There's a 40% cut in the research funding. Mr. Crowley, how would you describe the scientific risks of imposing a cut of this magnitude, and how can we make sure that we're maintaining our country's leadership and dominance in this area?
Yeah, again, Senator, we think the NIH plays an incredibly important foundational role in basic research and development, and something we should continue to fund and support. So that's something our industry broadly supports. And again, when we do that at the NIH, it encourages then the university research. It promotes research for startup biotech companies where, again, more than half of all new medicines originate. So we've got to strengthen that part of the virtuous circle.
Sequence of miracles. I yield back to the chair.
I will defer to Senator Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I agree this is a vitally important topic, our U.S. biotechnology is critical. Even in the state of Delaware, this is a big focus for us. Delivering life-saving cures, that's the bottom line. I'm concerned that this moment is kind of overshadowing this really critical conversation that we're having here. Right now, as I sat here, I saw that the window shopping period for healthcare.gov has opened up, and families right now are opening this website and seeing sticker shock for so many of them. I was literally, I'm sorry, I missed some of your testimony because I was on the phone with people in my state, whether they are from community centers, whether they are government officials. Our food bank is coming in later. One of our community centers said they literally ran out of food yesterday, and this is before we make choices with what happens with the SNAP program, things that make us healthy, eating good, healthy food. And so to the witnesses, I thank you for your testimony. I am looking forward to a real robust conversation on how to make sure that our country is strong, both our health, our national security, our agriculture, because biotechnology is really connected to all of that. Dr. Ramachandran, I want to start with you. With the president just leaving China, I think it's important to highlight that China is closing the innovation gap by strategically investing in biotechnology. In 2021, China released their 14th five-year plan, which laid out a whole-of-government blueprint to becoming a global leader in biotech. It is one of their strategic priorities as a country for healthcare, for agriculture, and for energy. Can you highlight a few of the specific priorities in that five-year plan?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. And you're absolutely right. In that plan, China made very strategic, targeted investments at every point of drug development, manufacturing, and delivery in order to enhance their role in our global biomedicine system, biomedical research system. In particular, for R&D, like the early stage research, what NIH typically funds, they wanted to hit a target of 7% annual increases over the five-year period, and actually have far exceeded that over time. They've also put in several grants in not just for early stage research, for clinical trials, to be able to have operations that would host clinical trials for companies that are based in other countries as well, and also prioritizing domestic pharmaceutical companies and domestic manufacturing. A lot of public investment that went to prop up small biotech that's in China, as well as manufacturing facilities. So really at every stage of the pipeline, China decided to put in a lot of investment, and we're seeing returns from that. They're obviously now a key player in terms of medicines that we have here. About a third of medicines that are new in the United States come from China, at least the products. And on top of that, generic medicines, obviously, several of them come from China as well. So they've positioned themselves to be a key global player, not just for themselves, but also the rest of the world in terms of biotechnical innovation.
I have a question for the panel, and it's just a yes or no. Have you seen in our country a comprehensive plan that's as strategic as this one in biotechnology for this country? Just yes or no?
No, Senator.
No?
No.
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 No. Thank you. That answer is because we don't have one. And I think watching the, and I'm just going to run down the cuts in research right now, the lack of focus on clinical trials and pulling away, getting rid of scientists and cuts to our institutions, our academic institutions, the talent pool that we need, the workforce, and shuttering agencies and getting rid of grants. I don't think that's a recipe for us to be a global leader in biotechnology. Do you? Anybody? Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this very important hearing, and I am really looking forward to continuing this dialogue because this is vital for our health, our national security, really for the world. I like what you said, Mr. Crowley. I don't mind if China makes our toys. I don't want them making our medicines. Thank you. I yield back.
Senator Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Totally agree with Senator Blunt-Rochester on that note. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this important hearing, such a incredibly important topic, and appreciate the feedback that we've already received from so many of you today. Indiana is a thriving hub for biotech innovation already. We have more than 3,200 life sciences companies. They directly employ about 70,000 Hoosiers in my state. The average salary is about $148,000, and the total payroll is about $7.4 billion for Indiana. IU, Purdue, and Notre Dame bring in over $1.6 billion in research funding annually. And Hoosier biotech companies are leading the way in orthopedics, neurology, radiopharmaceuticals, cancer research, regenerative medicine, and therapies for metabolic disease. In Carmel, for example, which is just north of Indianapolis, MBX Biosciences is developing a treatment for a rare hormone disorder. In West Lafayette, On Target Laboratories created the only FDA-approved imaging agent that helps surgeons better detect lung and ovarian cancer. And in Indianapolis,
Ossium Health is producing bone marrow for leukemia patients. And those are just a few of the success stories that we have in our great state. Mr. Schiller, how can the FDA make it easier to build more biopharmaceutical manufacturing facilities in the U.S. like the ones that I just mentioned? I know Senator Tuberville mentioned the FDA's pre-check program, but what else can we do?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think there are a few things FDA can be doing. One is using the new advanced manufacturing designation program that Congress recently passed and enhancing the benefits to participating in that, so making designation more of a tool for streamlining review. It can also be updating regulations to make it clearer how advanced manufacturing facilities can comply with some very outdated regulations that were written for older conventional techniques. I think there's also things that Congress can be thinking about, perhaps setting up a strategic stockpile of manufacturing capacity where investment in some of those upfront startup costs to building could then result in the United States obtaining rights to some amount of agile manufacturing capability that can be used in the case of a national emergency or a drug shortage.
I recently wrote a letter to the FDA urging them to step up the inspections of drug plants in China and India. Inspections of U.S. plants should also be a lot faster than what they are. How can the FDA adopt a more risk-based approach to inspections, focusing on facilities with histories of compliance or quality problems?
Senator, I agree with you that parity in inspections between domestic facilities and those located abroad, particularly in China and India, is incredibly important, especially when you look at the rates of warning letters that go to facilities located in some of those jurisdictions. It's much harder for FDA, unfortunately, to get to those facilities, and oftentimes there are diplomatic challenges to doing unannounced inspections, which is something we've done domestically. FDA has been doing some work trying to increase the number of unannounced inspections. That would be helpful. Also leveraging the remote inspection tools that we used during COVID in order to, in a risk-based way, free up some inspection resources, particularly lower risk facilities that have been inspected domestically, to free up inspectors to spend more time going to facilities that haven't been inspected more recently.
Mr. Crowley, IU, Purdue, and Notre Dame aren't just driving biotech innovation in Indiana, they're leaders for the whole country. But IP theft is a serious problem, and we see it in our own backyard. How widespread is IP theft, and how are we going to stop it?
No, it's very significant, Senator. The intellectual property, of course, is the foundation of a lot of what we do and the ability for us to fund. And, again, there's a reason why Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 of the United States Constitution included intellectual property protections. We're seeing increased espionage and theft from our global rival with China. We need to stop that. We need to support our law enforcement agencies, the FBI, our intelligence community, to stop that. We have enough trouble with the relatively fair competition and the plan from China. We need to strengthen the intellectual property protections, and that includes not just the threat from outside the United States, be it China or elsewhere. It's a threat from within. Policies, proposals, proposed legislation that would undermine intellectual property would be cutting the foundation of a lot of the capital that runs into biotechnology that's so needed for our cures.
Thank you. Great conversation. I yield back.
I will defer. Senator Hassan, your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that very much. I appreciate this hearing and our witnesses. I'll associate myself with Senator Baldwin's and Blunt Rochester's comments about the moment we're in and the opportunity to take action to make health insurance significantly more affordable for our constituents and make sure they get the care they need. Dr. Ramachandran, drug-resistant superbugs are on the rise across the world. Each year, tens of thousands of Americans die after being infected by superbug bacteria that have evolved and outsmarted the antibiotics that we've used for decades. In order to combat these superbugs, it's critical that we support the development of antibiotics that are truly new and different from our existing options. How can Congress target our investments to ensure that we're investing in antibiotics that will perform better than the status quo?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. And this is very much tied to the current moment that we're in right now in terms of where we're supposed to be putting our dollars and also our resources to be able to address the global crisis of antimicrobial resistance that is also hitting our shores here. In particular, the big sort of roadblock that we're seeing is actually finding novel compounds, novel treatments to treat drug-resistant infections. Most of the new antibiotics that have come through the pipeline and have been approved by the FDA are usually different sort of versions of existing antibiotics, which means that resistance will happen faster amongst patients that have drug-resistant infections. And this is a problem because we're just not seeing new options really coming onto the market. And that's oftentimes because of a lack of drug discovery investment from the federal government and the need for not just NIH funding, but also CDC funding to do that surveillance to identify drug-resistant infections in the first place so that we can be able to do that early stage research to find new compounds to address the crisis that we're seeing.
Thank you. So more investment and more CDC action and surveillance. Okay. Dr. Kesselheim, biosimilar drugs are generic versions of complex medications such as cancer drugs and drugs to treat autoimmune diseases. When a biosimilar drug enters the market, it's often half the price of the comparable brand name drug. However, brand name drug makers often block these low-cost alternatives from getting to patients by filing for dozens of frivolous patents, and by doing so, they force patients to continue to pay their high prices. What policy changes can Congress consider in order to get patients access to these lower-cost biosimilar drugs more quickly?
Great. So, as I mentioned in my testimony, one of the things that Congress can consider are there are bills that are currently being discussed that would help reduce the thickets of patents that are grown up around these drugs, allowing legitimate innovations to be protected by meaningful intellectual property, but not allowing companies to build dozens and dozens and even hundreds of patents that prevent the entry of competitive biosimilar products that can lead to competition and lower prices. And then I would add to that, once a biosimilar drug is approved, then there needs to be efforts to try to ensure that patients are prescribed that medication, and that it can be and that when the science supports it, and it seems like the science is supporting it, that it can be made interchangeable with the original biologic product so that it can be automatically substituted at the pharmacy level. Those kinds of steps, I think, can help those lower cost, helpful biosimilar products make impact in patients' lives.
Thank you. Mr. Crowley, advances in genetic screening and the production of synthetic DNA have the potential to cure deadly diseases and make Americans healthier. However, there are also serious risks. If these technologies end up in the wrong hands, they could be misused to produce dangerous pathogens or targeted bioweapons. What actions are your members taking to ensure that cutting-edge American technologies don't end up in the hands of bad actors or foreign adversaries like China?
Yes, and I appreciate and share that concern, Senator, particularly as a former intelligence officer in the United States. This is a great threat as well. A lot of it is the unknown. So I think a good part of this, and this is part of our trade association's responsibility, is to educate. You know, the only difference between doing good and doing incredibly wrong or evil with biotechnology is intent and purpose. So I think much of this lies on a lot of the self-policing, the education, the awareness, together with, you know, all the different ways in which our government can protect losing any of this technology to any foreign competitor, foreign rival.
Right. And part of it, it seems to me, too, is helping and working collaboratively with all of you to figure out what kind of guidelines and standards you already follow to try to prevent the misuse of your technology moving forward. And we'd love to kind of touch base with you about that and see what kind of standards might be applicable. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hey, thank you all for being here. I get to ask questions last. It's, I guess, polite, but it's actually selfish. Now I get to go as long as I want. Dr. Kesselheim, you said that investment has not fallen in biotech, and I think it was in relation to a question about the impact of the IRA. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I said in relation to the IRA, there's been...
Let me ask. Yeah. Now, what about, because I hear from Biotech, I'm going to have Mr. Crowley respond in just a second, that that much of this offshoring to China has had a very negative impact upon biotech and investment in biotech. Would you include that in your statement that there's not been a decrease?
Well, I think it's very important to try to promote biotechnology development and manufacturing in the U.S. The question that I answered was related to the IRA and the
Now,
effect
can you
the IRA had.
differentiate the IRA from the impact of offshoring to China?
Right. So my response was related to the impact of the IRA, not related to
Have you seen a decrease in investment related to the offshoring of activity to China?
I think, as I said, I think that we have seen a movement in offshoring of companies' investment in manufacturing to China, and that's why I think that there need to be efforts to try to move that kind of manufacturing back to the U.S.
Mr. Crowley, can you actually tell it, and how do you parse it? How can you parse the impact of the IRA? And I'm asking totally, I don't know the answer here. Parse the difference between offshoring versus the IRA. Can you parse that? Has there been a decrease in investment in biotech?
You know, I think, Senator, just to frame it, this has been a tough 4.5 years for emerging biotechnology. We can provide you as a follow-up lots of stats and statistics, the market value of companies, number of IPOs, number of programs being cut, and there are a lot of factors for that as well. With respect to the IRA, it's going to be really hard to understand how many programs would have been funded but for the IRA. It's hard to prove the negative, and I agree with Dr. Kesselheim. In the near term, generally R&D programs continue to be funded. It's the long-term impact that we worry about. I think the important fix, though, to the IRA, and what we're clearly seeing, and you could talk to any venture investor, private market investor, companies, large companies, as they look at their portfolio, is a shift away from small molecules to small molecules to large molecules because of the 9 versus 13
Has there been a shift in that investment?
disparity.
Can you see a discernible shift? Could Kesselheim say, oh my gosh, here, right now, I see there's been money moving towards the longer duration versus the shorter duration research?
I think it's more the research funding, particularly in the early stage, Senator, moving more toward large molecules away from small molecules and not following the science, particularly when small molecules are so important. You know, they cross the blood-brain barrier, as you know. They are the drugs most likely
I'm going
to
to pause you for a
generic.
second just because I got like a lot of questions, and even though I got a lot of time, I'm still going to go. Mr. Schiller, you talk about domestic manufacturing. There was a generic drug plant in Shreveport recently closed, Dr. Reddy's, went back to India, left all their equipment. And the labor cost and whatever in the United States, they just cheaper to make it there and to ship it here. And I asked about robotics. And they said, well, you can do robotics, but that, and you mentioned this, the upfront cost to invest in robotics is so much that still you're better off going to India. That's what I was told. Is that true? Because you're advocating a reshoring of manufacturing, but is the cost of generics so little that even if we put in advanced manufacturing, we'll always be at a competitive disadvantage?
I do believe that is a problem, Senator, that the margins on many generic products have gotten so low that it's not profitable to manufacture many of them in the United States. And if you have some amount of upfront investment in advanced manufacturing facilities where the unit cost does go down, that can help. But finding the capital to invest upfront.
But if you found the capital to invest, would it level out over end if you amortize the investment over 20 years? I mean, has anybody put, finger to keyboard to put it in a spreadsheet to see if that works out?
Part of the problem is that the capital isn't sitting in an account to invest upfront to then amortize.
Dr. Makower, you're the one who kind of told me about this post-FDA marketing being a problem. Now, I talked to CMS regarding another aspect of this, and they told me that the FDA, and I think you said, it's not in front of me, but like 9 to 7 years between FDA approval and actually getting insurance coverage?
5.7 years.
5.7? That FDA uses a safe and effective standard, and CMS uses a reasonable and necessary standard, which is not, they kind of overlap, if you will. They're not entirely. Is that what the holdup is?
That's part of it. I think one of the complications is that reasonable and necessary has not really been defined, whereas in a lot of FDA studies, safety and efficacy is agreed on and negotiated in the whatever trial or design, and it is the study's either met or not. It's really unclear how reasonable and necessary is fundamentally determined. The big challenge is that we have a system where these innovations can be created, proven to be safe and effective by the FDA, but there are substantial time delays even in accomplishing coding, going through the coverage decisions. It's just an extremely Byzantine and very long process. And during that time, investors are just funding these companies.
Now, is that something which reasonably could be addressed by AI?
I actually do believe so. AI could be exceptionally helpful. There needs to be process reform, for sure.
But that's against CMS.
That's
Mr.
on
Schiller,
CMS.
I'm going to ask you to comment on something that Dr. Makower said, because you were formerly at the FDA, but you may not know this, but I'll let anybody take a crack. That under the Biden administration, that there was a increased emphasis upon third-party review, but you say, Dr. Makower, that the FDA will then re-review. You don't actually say it, but you strongly imply it, and which defeats the purpose. Why in the heck would they re-review if you just third-party reviewed?
Thank you for the question, Senator. That has been an issue, and there has been substantial underutilization of the third-party review pathway because the benefit isn't that clear. And part of that is variable quality in the third-party reviews. FDA could be doing more to ensure that the third parties who come in and do the reviews are able to do it consistently, predictably. When there is inconsistency in those reviews, it also diminishes the incentive to do that third-party review. If, as a manufacturer, you can expect an easier process with the FDA rather than that third party.
So then if it's the third-party review is inconsistent, there should be some sort of quality control on third-party reviewers, and you get rid of the people who are lousy and you keep the people who are good, huh? I mean, that's kind of like third-party review 101.
If I can step in on a couple of points that were made. One, in terms of the third-party review system, Mr. Schiller is correct that only about 2% of devices in recent years have actually undergone third-party review. It's a very small amount, but a government audit was actually done to actually show discrepancies in terms of vendor quality, which have forced FDA to actually step in to do a re-review. So there are things to address sort of efficiency. There were some recommendations that were put forward both to FDA and Congress on how that might be used. A key aspect of this is that the third-party review is actually funded from leftover funds from the user fee program. So it's kind of whatever is left is then goes to third-party review to be able to identify vendors to actually do that sort of process in the first place, which is not really efficient use of the funds, frankly. And on top of that, it's compounded by another larger issue in terms of the quality of pre-market evidence that is submitted by medical device manufacturers. We did a big analysis of all breakthrough devices that have been approved by the FDA as of 2023, and we found that several, about 1 in 10 medical breakthrough devices don't have any clinical testing to support them. So no sort of verification about safety and efficacy before FDA market authorization. And on top of that, most of those actually did not have post-market requirements to actually make sure that we actually can confirm safety and efficacy. For Medicare in particular, reasonable and necessary also means reasonable and necessary for their beneficiaries, which includes older adults. If you look at the clinical trials that support breakthrough device authorization, older adults are oftentimes not represented in those trials. So we're not even testing in them in the population that Medicare covers, which would also introduce complexities in terms of Medicare coverage. And this is why they've employed things like coverage of evidence development to be able to force
Let me stop you for a second, though. I was trained as a gastroenterologist, so you're going to follow this in a couple different ways. First, it seems like sometimes what you're saying, like it has to be proven for people over 65 as being a little anal. And I say that because if you're looking at whether or not something detects polyps in cancer, if it detects a polyp and a cancer in someone who's 55, it's going to detect it in someone who's 65. There's nothing fundamentally different between cancer shedding whatever it sheds in someone of a different age.
That's correct, and I can grant you that. And this is why we have FDA authorization, but that also is predicated on the fact that FDA then has the evidence, right, clinical testing that actually shows that sort of effect.
So, Dr. Makower, we're hearing a defense of the FDA's process, and your testimony was actually calling for a reform, but that there's not adequate pre-market, there's not a prescribed post-market, which the FDA should prescribe it. Any other comments upon all that?
Well, I think that the legislation that's in front of Congress actually calls for accelerated coverage and concomitant studies that allow for these questions to be answered in that time frame. I agree with you that very often the there's no difference between the studied population that was necessary for pre-market authorization and what the results would be in an older population. But it's certainly reasonable to look at that, and that's called for in the legislation that's in front of Congress now.
I could keep going, but they've called votes. I really appreciate y'all being here. We'll submit some questions for the record. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, who could not be here, has a question for the record that we'll send to you, Mr. Crowley. You've been very helpful, though, and I look forward to, if any of you have continued input, please feel free to continue to give. For any senator wishing to ask additional questions for the records will be due at 5 p.m. Thursday, November 13th. Thank you again for being here.